Since the earliest civilizations, social hierarchies have been a consistent tactic used by small groups of individuals to hold control over much greater populations. Hierarchies also serve to organize how work is done and to clarify who has what rights and responsibilities. But all hierarchies are not the same. History has seen hierarchies based on religion, tribal affiliation, ethnicity, race, inherited status, wealth, and other criteria. Sometimes hierarchies were based on multiple criteria, such as in France before the French Revolution when the royalty and clergy shared power. Some hierarchies were harsh and rigid, others were more flexible, allowing people to be upwardly or downwardly mobile. In seeking to build empires, the European powers relied on pre-existing hierarchies or built new ones to keep order in their new lands. The English treatment of India and the Spanish treatment of Mexico illustrate how dramatically different colonial hierarchies could be. This is borne out by historical research, but is also strikingly apparent in photos and pictures from colonial times. Let's begin by taking a look at English intervention in India. England set out to control India and its vast resources, but not to colonize in a matter of the 13 North American colonies. The Englishmen who came over did so to administer the crown jewel of the British Empire, usually working for either the East India Company or the colonial government itself. They were not settlers like the colonists who moved to North America. By and large, they seldom intermarried with Indians, and they were quite content to not only tolerate both Hinduism and Islam, but to rely on pre-existing Hindu caste system. The castes were ostensibly professional divisions, but were locked firmly into place by birth and a rigid structure of social rules that govern interaction between and within them. Now let's look at Spanish intervention in Mexico. In sharp contrast, the Spanish settled Mexico, bringing in slaves in their own religion, Catholicism, which was forced on everyone. Native people were either killed or effectively enslaved as well. Unlike in India, the Spanish did intermarry with people who were not of pure Spanish descent. In Mexico, a caste called Castizo or Creole was defined as the offspring of a Peninsulare Spaniard and a Mestizo, half Spanish, half Indian, or mulatto, half Spanish, half Negro. So the Indian caste system was based on religion, whereas the Sistema de Castas was based on race and bloodlines. In the Indian caste system, there is no name or caste covering anyone of mixed Indian and English descent. Such cases were rare and existed outside the caste system, as the English were far more removed from the Indian society they controlled. These types of differences are what we see in pictures from colonial times in both countries. Let's start with the older of the colonial hierarchies, Mexico. The Spanish, under Cortez, began the conquest of Mexico in 1519 and effectively ended the Aztec Empire 2 years later. As early as the beginning of the 17th century, cast paintings began to appear. Spanish America not only had strong connections with Spain, but underwent crucial social and cultural transformations. Although there was no formal formatting for these paintings, most featured a 4x4 matrix of different racial combinations. Some did not attempt to depict a top-down hierarchy, but most like the one you see places a number in each cell in the case the viewer is confused. The various combinations of intermarriage between Spaniards or Criollos, colonial-born whites, and Indians and Negroes were the true subject matter of the paintings, which were viewed by some as educational but served many administrative purposes as well, such as taxation. The Spanish also believed blood was a vehicle for transmitting a host of physical, psychological, and moral traits. Looking at this casta, what do we see? First, each cell in the casta shows a man, a woman, and a child. While all these illustrations are valuable as historical data, the paintings were intended to clarify how each child born of a certain intermarriage of parents should be treated. Second, looking at each person in each cell, there are both differences and similarities. Differences may be more important. Only in the cell labeled 7, second row, third from the left, do we see a figure that is obviously an Indian with an elaborate headdress. Otherwise, everyone on the casta dresses more or less like a European, no matter what combination of white. Men wear jackets, shirts, pants, hats, and shoes. Women wear dresses, aprons, etc. Of course, there are differences according to the class or economic standing. The higher the castas wear fancier, finer clothes, while the lower ones wear rougher working garments. However, the range in clothing style looks like a lot what might have been the range seen in Europe at the time. Third, what is different is the careful attention to skin color and to the child in each picture. After all, the paintings were in effect a set of general guidelines on how these children would be treated in society. The fact that these paintings could typically contain 16 different pictures shows how obsessed the Spanish were in making sure that everyone in the hierarchy, no matter what racial mix, knew exactly what their place was. These paintings are a remarkable historical record of thinking how to rule an empire. There is no English colonial Indian equivalent to the casta paintings, probably because the English had so much less involvement in Indian society. For the most part, they did not intermarry with Indians, and they simply adopted the Hindu caste system that was already in place when they arrived to suit their needs. They had no need for visual guidelines. However, many photos bear out the differences between Spanish and English rule. Let's start with some pictures of working people. Here we see a group of Indian accountants. They seem proud, stiff, and formal. Accounting for the Indians was an English occupation, more than a traditional role for the Indian men. Of course, many during the early days of photography regarded the event as a fairly formal affair. There are a few early candidates, mostly stiff portraits and landscapes. Still, what is unmistakable in this picture is that the accountants in no way, shape, or form could be mistaken for Englishmen. Even if skin color and facial hair are ignored, it is obvious these men are not English. They dress in white according to the Indian custom and in contrast to the English colonial masters. Now let's look at another photo. This time of a man in Mexico, obviously a working man who's sitting by a spinning wheel. His clothes seem a bit dirty and appropriate for a working man, but apart from his sombrero, the signature men's hat for dealing with the strong Mexican sun, and skin color, it seems as though he could be a poor peasant in a rural town in Spain. Again, the removing skin color, the Indian accountants are more obviously Indian than this man is Mexican. The Spanish built the Mexican hierarchy to incorporate themselves at the top. The English accepted the Hindu hierarchy but never inserted themselves into it. If it is unfair to compare skilled Gujarati accountants with a humble Mexican peasant, then consider this photo of workers at an Indian cotton market. Once again, they are workers, but they do not in any way connect back to the Englishmen who undoubtedly ran those markets for the good of the empire and their own fortunes. These men are probably unskilled and certainly do not pose for the camera with any great pride. And once again, they are distinctly Indian, dressed in traditional white garments that would never have been worn by an Englishman. These themes can be seen in photos of women as well. In these photos, we see proud Brahmin women posing for portraits. By posture and demeanor, they clearly see themselves as important, and once again, we see them as distinctly Indian. This goes beyond skin color. Their sarisas and gowns do not all resemble what English women of any class would be wearing at the time. They are at the top of a hierarchy because English women are not a part of their hierarchy. Now, examining this photograph of a mestiza-looking woman, we are clearly introduced to a woman of low social class. This is apparent due to the color of her skin and the location of the photo, whereas the woman is standing next to a well and a torn-down pulley system. Again, while her clothes may have some native influences, the style is more European peasant than anything else. In another photograph of 5 teenage girls dressed in expensive-looking clothing, it is clear that they are part of the Mexican elite. These girls have very fair skin, suggesting that they most likely had at least some Spanish blood versus native or black. Additionally, the gold cross necklaces suggest that they are Christian women. At the time, there was an extreme divide between the Mexican elite and the majority of Mexico. These two images portray the class system of Mexican culture before the Mexican Revolution. It provides insight into the inequality of how these Mexican people lived. The federal troops who defended the hierarchy looked like well-equipped, uniformed European soldiers in many European countries at the time, with the exception of one sombrero. In contrast, the revolutionary fighters, in addition to their sombreros, look like peasants. They have no uniforms and they certainly appear to be poor. Of course, their leader Emiliano Zapata was a fairly well-dressed man with a certain flair for European style. However, the Porfirio Diaz and his leadership were pretty indistinguishable from other European elites. If there were ever a difference between the Indian and Mexican revolutions, remember the Zapata photo shown a little earlier and compared to the leader of the Indian Revolution, Mahatma Gandhi. As a revolutionary leader, Gandhi was many things, but he was not very English in style or appearance. Today, India and Mexico are dramatically different countries, reflecting in part the differences in the social hierarchies that prevailed during their colonial periods.